Jason Carter,
You will be
a
transferred to the custody
15-year-old
of the
boy with a
Department of
defiant
Corrections.
glare and a mop of unruly brown hair, sat rigidly on the bench in a packed courtroom in downtown Dallas, Texas. The polished oak floors gleamed beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, while rows of onlookers whispered quietly behind the heavy wooden railing separating the public from the proceedings. The air was thick with anticipation as Judge Martha Ellison, a stern woman in her mid-50s, known for her unwavering commitment to law and order, prepared to read the charges against him. The young teenager, wearing a faded black hoodie and scuffed sneakers, exhibited an unsettling nonchalance, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, as if daring the courtroom to truly care about his fate. Before we delve into this emotional and intense story, make sure to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. We're eager to hear your thoughts on Jason Carter's case and how it resonates with your own experiences, so drop a comment below letting us know where you're tuning in from. Your engagement inspires us to continue sharing these important narratives that highlight the struggles of youth and the complexities of the justice system. The charge sheet lay in the judge's hands like a damning script: vandalism and resisting arrest during a recent school protest at Lincoln High School. The courtroom had gathered witnesses, reporters, and concerned community members, each drawn by the growing tensions that the protest had ignited across the city. Jason's parents, seated near the front, exchanged worried glances, their faces etched with a mixture of frustration and helplessness. The silence was broken only by the judge's measured voice, which echoed off the walls as she began to outline the accusations. Jason Carter, you stand before this court today charged with the deliberate destruction of school property, specifically spray painting the west-facing wall of Lincoln High School and resisting arrest by physically struggling with law enforcement officers during their attempt to detain you on the afternoon of March 14th, Judge Ellison declared, her tone grave and unwavering. Jason's reaction was a soft, dismissive, whatever, barely audible over the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. His lips curled into a faint smirk, betraying a mixture of defiance and boredom. The judge paused momentarily, her eyes narrowing as she regarded the teenager before her. "Do you understand the seriousness of these charges, young man?" she asked. Jason shrugged, his gaze flickering toward the courtroom door as if plotting another escape. "Yeah, whatever," he repeated, his tone dripping with indifference. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted palpably. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Morales, leaned forward eagerly, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Your Honor, this behavior cannot be overlooked. The damage caused was extensive, requiring costly repairs, and the defiance shown during arrest undermines the authority of law enforcement." As the judge nodded, the courtroom clerk began to call witnesses and present preliminary evidence. The gallery held its collective breath, waiting for the first glimpse into what had transpired during the protest that had quickly spiraled from peaceful demonstration into chaotic confrontation. Jason's demeanor remained unreadable, his hands clenched tightly in his lap as he stared blankly ahead. He seemed detached, as though the gravity of the moment had yet to penetrate his adolescent veneer. Behind him, his mother, Karen Carter, fought back tears, her knuckles white from gripping the pew. His father, Mark Carter, a stoic man who worked long hours as a mechanic, sat with arms folded, his jaw clenched in silent frustration. The judge continued, "Mr. Carter, You will have the opportunity to respond to the charges, but for now, the court must address the evidence presented by the prosecution." Jason's whispered, "Whatever," echoed again, drawing a sharp glance from Judge Ellison. The tension in the room thickened, suspending time as the legal machinery prepared to turn. Outside the courtroom, the protest at Lincoln High School had become a flashpoint in a larger debate about education funding and policy reforms in Dallas. Students, teachers, and community members had gathered to voice their frustrations over budget cuts that threatened extracurricular programs and increased class sizes. What began as a peaceful rally quickly escalated when a group of students, including Jason, allegedly took to spray painting slogans and symbols on school walls, drawing police intervention. Witnesses described scenes of shouting, pushing, and scattered groups attempting to subdue the unrest. Among these witnesses was Officer Thomas Reynolds, who had been dispatched to the scene. His testimony would later describe Jason as aggressive and uncooperative during the attempted arrest, further complicating the teenager's defense. As the proceedings unfolded, the courtroom buzzed with whispered speculation. Some sympathized with the youthful protesters, seeing their actions as a cry for help in a system that often ignored their voices. Others condemned the destruction and lawlessness, demanding accountability. The media had already dubbed Jason the face of rebellion at Lincoln High, a label that only deepened the spotlight on his trial. Throughout the opening moments, Jason's response remained a stark contrast to the weighty accusations. His repeated "whatever" was not merely a word but a shield, a barrier erected against the expectations and judgments of a society he seemed unwilling to engage with. It was a defense mechanism that puzzled observers, leaving many to wonder if beneath the bravado lay a more fragile, troubled boy. Judge Ellison's gaze lingered on Jason a moment longer before calling the court to order. "We will proceed with the presentation of evidence," she announced, signaling the start of a process that would unravel the events of that day and perhaps expose the deeper struggles within a young life caught between defiance and despair. As the clerk prepared the courtroom for the testimony, Jason sat motionless, his eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the walls, as if already detached from the fate that awaited him. The case of Jason Carter was only just beginning, but it had already stirred a community into reflection, a reflection on youth, authority, and the fragile boundaries where protest turns to crime, and where innocence clashes with accountability. In this crowded Dallas courtroom, a 15-year-old boy faced not only the law, but the judgment of a society grappling with its own fractures and fears. As the courtroom settled into uneasy silence, Judge Martha Ellison adjusted her glasses and began reading aloud the potential penalties Jason Carter faced. The weight of the charges hung heavy in the air, thickening the tension that had already been simmering beneath the surface. The judge's voice was deliberate, each word punctuated by the solemnity the situation demanded. "Vandalism of public property is a serious offense," she intoned, her gaze locking onto the young defendant. "Penalties may include fines, community service, probation, and in certain cases, detention in juvenile facilities. Resisting arrest compounds these charges and may result in additional sanctions." Her eyes narrowed slightly as she continued. "Given the evidence presented, the court must consider the full extent of your actions and their impact on the community." Jason, seated on the bench, barely reacted. His posture remained rigid, arms folded defiantly across his chest. When the judge's words penetrated the courtroom's quiet, he responded with a casual, almost dismissive, "Whatever." The single word slipped from his lips with a detached air, as if the gravity of his predicament was a distant echo he neither wished to hear nor acknowledge. The judge paused, her expression tightening. "Mr. Carter, this is not a matter to be taken lightly. Your response suggests a lack of regard for the consequences you may face." Jason's eyes flicked toward the judge briefly before retreating to stare blankly at the floor. "I'm not scared," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for several in the courtroom to catch the defiance in his tone. The prosecuting attorney, Linda Morales, seized the moment to underscore the seriousness of the case. Rising from her seat, she addressed the court with measured intensity. "Your Honor, the defendant's dismissive attitude is emblematic of a broader problem. His actions during the protest were reckless and destructive, and his resistance to law enforcement only exacerbates the situation. This is not simply youthful rebellion, it is a blatant disregard for the rule of law." Morales presented the court with a series of video clips recorded by bystanders during the protest, the grainy footage flickering on the courtroom's large screen. The images showed a crowd of students chanting and holding signs, their voices rising in unison against the backdrop of the school's aged brick facade. Then the scene shifted to painted slogans sprawled hastily across walls, bold letters scrawled in black and red spray paint, some messages illegible, others clearly voicing demands for better funding and educational reform. The footage cut to police officers attempting to disperse the crowd, their batons raised, voices commanding. It captured the moment Jason was confronted, struggling against officers' grips. His movements tense, his face flushed with anger and fear. The video ended with him being forcibly led away, resisting with every ounce of will. Witnesses called to testify corroborated the prosecution's narrative. Officer Thomas Reynolds described the chaos, painting a picture of escalating tension and danger. "The crowd was becoming unruly," he testified, "and when we attempted to detain Mr. Carter for vandalism, he responded aggressively, pulling away and yelling at officers." Other witnesses, including teachers and fellow students, offered varying perspectives. Some sympathized with Jason's cause, but not his methods, while others condemned the destruction and disorder as harmful to the community he claimed to represent. Despite the weight of the evidence and the testimonies, Jason's demeanor remained largely unchanged. His indifferent "whatever" echoed intermittently throughout the proceedings, a refrain that puzzled and unsettled those present. It was as if he sought to erect an invisible barrier between himself and the reality confronting him, a reality that involved legal consequences, public scrutiny, and an uncertain future. Karen Carter, Jason's mother, sat quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a tissue. Her eyes, rimmed red from sleepless nights and tears, followed every word with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. She had watched her son transform over the past year, from a bright, eager middle schooler into a withdrawn teenager who often retreated into silence or anger. The protest had been his first real act of rebellion, and now it threatened to define him forever. Mark Carter, his father, remained stoic, but visibly strained. He had always believed in discipline and hard work as the path to success, but Jason's recent behavior challenged his convictions. The elder Carter's jaw tightened each time his son's defiance surfaced, his hopes for a straightforward resolution slipping away. The defense attorney, Michael Reynolds, began to prepare his case. He approached the bench with a calm but determined demeanor, ready to counter the prosecution's narrative. In his opening remarks, he acknowledged the severity of the charges, but emphasized Jason's youth and the emotional turmoil that led to his actions. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," Reynolds began, "we are not here to excuse vandalism or resistance to lawful authority. However, we must understand the context, the frustration, the pain, and the sense of powerlessness felt by a young man pushed to his limits. Jason Carter's behavior is a cry for help, not a calculated criminal enterprise." The courtroom listened as Reynolds painted a portrait of a teenager grappling with mounting pressures, academic struggles, family hardships, and the burden of representing a generation demanding change. He urged the court to consider rehabilitation over punishment, warning against letting this moment define Jason's entire life. Throughout the defense's statements, Jason's expression softened only briefly, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through his guarded exterior. Yet, when the judge asked him directly how he felt about the charges and potential penalties, his response was the same: short, dismissive, and chilling in its simplicity. "Whatever," he said again, his voice steady but stripped of any humor or lightness. This repeated refrain became a motif, unsettling the courtroom. For some, it was a sign of youthful arrogance. For others, a symptom of deeper emotional wounds. The judge's eyes lingered on Jason, searching for any hint of remorse or understanding, but found only a guarded wall. As the day wore on, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew increasingly strained. Reporters scribbled notes feverishly, capturing every detail for the evening news. Community members whispered among themselves, divided in their opinions of Jason's actions and character. The legal battle was more than just a case. It was a reflection of a fractured society wrestling with issues far beyond vandalism and disorder. Judge Ellison finally called a recess, allowing all parties a brief respite. Jason stood slowly, his movements stiff, and glanced briefly at his parents before exiting the courtroom under the watchful eyes of bailiffs. His whatever attitude had not softened, but beneath the surface, unseen by most, a storm of anxiety and uncertainty churned. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered in small clusters, debating the implications of Jason's defiance. Some framed him as a symbol of youthful rebellion against an uncaring system. Others labeled him a delinquent who needed to be held accountable. The community's response was as fractured as the courtroom itself. As proceedings were set to continue, one thing was clear: Jason Carter's indifferent whatever was more than a reluctant refrain. It was a barrier guarding a troubled boy from a world that demanded he face consequences he was not yet prepared to accept. The courtroom awaited the next chapter in a story that was only beginning to unravel. The courtroom had settled into a tense quiet when the defense began to peel back the layers of the day's events, offering a window into the protest at Lincoln High that had culminated in Jason Carter's arrest. It was a moment that shifted the focus from the courtroom's formalities to the charged atmosphere that had erupted on school grounds just days before. On March 14th, the sun had hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the aging brick facade of Lincoln High School. Students gathered in the courtyard, their voices rising in chants and songs, banners waving in the mild spring breeze. The protest was organized in response to recent budget cuts that threatened to slash arts programs, reduce staff, and increase class sizes. Changes that struck at the heart of a community already grappling with economic hardships. Jason, then a 15-year-old sophomore, had been among the students rallying for their right to a better education. Witnesses recalled him standing near the front of the crowd, his voice loud and unwavering as he called for change. Yet beneath the youthful determination, there was an undercurrent of frustration and anger simmering just below the surface. Defense attorney Michael Reynolds painted a picture of a school environment strained by neglect and disenfranchisement. These students were not mere troublemakers, he argued. They were young people, desperate to be heard, facing a future dimmed by cuts and broken promises. Jason's actions, while misguided, stemmed from a place of genuine concern and a desire to fight for his peers. The defense introduced testimonies from teachers and students who described the protest's initial peaceful intent. Ms. Angela Simmons, a history teacher at Lincoln High, recounted how the students had gathered in the gymnasium to organize, drafting petitions and preparing signs. They were passionate, yes, she testified, but their goal was to raise awareness, not to cause harm. However, as the afternoon wore on, the mood shifted. The administration's refusal to engage with the students' demands, combined with the arrival of law enforcement officers, escalated tensions. The crowd grew restless. Some students began to express their anger through graffiti, marking the school's walls with slogans demanding fair funding now and save our schools. Jason's role in this transformation became a focal point of debate. While the prosecution portrayed him as an instigator who led the vandalism, the defense argued that he was swept up in a larger wave of emotion and peer influence. Classmate and friend Sarah Lopez testified that Jason had been hesitant at first, but eventually joined the spray painting after others had begun. He wasn't trying to be destructive, Sarah explained. He just wanted people to see how serious this was. I think he thought it was a way to make a statement, to make sure the adults listened. The defense also highlighted the chaotic nature of the police response. Officer Thomas Reynolds, whose testimony had been critical for the prosecution, was cross-examined about the tactics used during the arrest. Questions arose about whether the officers had escalated the situation prematurely and whether Jason's resistance was a reaction to perceived aggression rather than outright defiance. Throughout the trial, Jason's own voice was subdued. When called upon to speak, he offered minimal responses, his repeated whatever, cutting through the room with a stark finality. It was as though the courtroom was witnessing a boy caught between worlds, too young to fully grasp the legal ramifications, yet old enough to feel the burden of judgment. Behind the scenes, Jason's personal struggles began to surface. His mother, Karen Carter, shared in a quiet interview how the pressures of home life had weighed heavily on him. A single parent juggling multiple jobs to keep the family afloat, Karen described the toll financial instability had taken on their household. Jason tries to be strong, she said, voice trembling, but sometimes I think all this stress just builds up inside him. School isn't easy, and then there's all the stuff going on at home. I think the protest was his way of trying to take control of something, anything. Teachers noted how Jason's grades had slipped over the past year, his usually bright spirit dimming amid increasing disinterest and occasional outbursts. His counselor reported sessions marked by silence and frustration, a boy struggling to articulate feelings that seemed too complex for his age. The defense presented this background not as an excuse, but as a plea for understanding. They urged the court to consider Jason's youth and circumstances when determining his fate, emphasizing rehabilitation and support over punishment. The prosecution, however, remained steadfast. Linda Morales argued that while Jason's frustrations were understandable, they did not absolve him of responsibility. The line between protest and destruction was crossed, she insisted. Actions have consequences, and Jason must be held accountable to deter similar behavior in the future. The trial also revealed fissures within the community itself. Parents, educators, and officials debated fiercely in public forums and social media, some defending the students' right to protest, others condemning the vandalism and its cost to the school district. The case became a microcosm of larger societal tensions about youth activism, authority, and the boundaries of civil disobedience. Neighbors living near Lincoln High recounted the day of the protest with varying emotions. Some recalled the noise and disruption with annoyance, seeing it as a disturbance to the neighborhood's peace. Others expressed solidarity with the students, acknowledging the validity of their grievances even if they did not condone the methods. As the courtroom proceedings continued, the narrative of a teenager caught in the crossfire of systemic issues became clearer. Jason Carter was not merely a defendant facing charges of vandalism and resisting arrest. He was emblematic of a generation grappling with uncertainty and the desire to be heard. Judge Martha Ellison observed the testimonies with a measured gaze, aware that the legal questions before her were entwined with broader social dynamics. The courtroom was not just a venue for adjudication, but a stage where the struggles of youth, education, and authority played out in stark relief. Jason's repeated "whatever" lingered in the minds of those present, not just as a phrase of defiance, but as a symbol of a boy caught between rebellion and resignation. It was a voice muffled by circumstance, crying out amid the noise of a world that sometimes seemed unwilling to listen. As the trial unfolded, the community waited with bated breath, torn between sympathy and frustration, hope and disappointment. The story of Jason Carter was weaving itself into the fabric of Dallas, a story of protest, consequence, and the complicated journey of adolescence in a time of change. The courtroom grew tense as the prosecution began presenting the video footage and witness testimonies that collectively painted a vivid and unsettling picture of the protest's escalation and Jason Carter's role within it. The flickering images on the large screen commanded the attention of everyone present, drawing the courtroom back to that fateful afternoon at Lincoln High School, where voices for change had quickly spiraled into chaos. The prosecution's lead witness, Officer Thomas Reynolds, took the stand with a measured but resolute demeanor. His uniform crisp and badge gleaming under the courtroom lights, Reynolds recounted the events with precise detail. "When we arrived at Lincoln High, the crowd was growing restless," he testified. "The students were blocking access to school buildings, chanting loudly, and several were engaging in vandalism, spray painting slogans on walls and breaking windows." As the video rolled, the courtroom saw grainy footage captured by a bystander's smartphone. The camera shook slightly as it zoomed in on a group of students gathered near the school's west wall, where bold black letters spelled out, "Fund our future" and "No more cuts." The crowd's energy was palpable, their voices rising in unison, yet the mood was far from peaceful. Suddenly, the footage showed law enforcement officers moving in to disperse the crowd. Tensions flared instantly. Shouts turned to screams. Some students pushed back, and scuffles broke out. The video captured a moment when Jason Carter was confronted by officers attempting to detain him. His movements were frantic. He pulled away, his face flushed with agitation and desperation. Officer Reynolds described the encounter. Mr. Carter resisted arrest. He struggled against officers' attempts to restrain him, shouting and refusing to comply. His behavior endangered both himself and those around him. The prosecution played additional clips showing the aftermath: damaged property, broken glass, and hurried efforts by school staff to clean the graffiti. Witnesses testified to the cost of repairs, emphasizing the disruption and financial burden imposed on the community. Several students who had attended the protest were called to testify. Some recounted how the event had spiraled beyond their control. One witness, Alex Martinez, stated, "We wanted to make a statement, but once the police showed up, everything got out of hand. People were scared, and some started acting out in ways they wouldn't normally." Another student, Rebecca Tran, described Jason's reaction during the confrontation. "He was angry, but I think he was just scared too. When the officers grabbed him, he freaked out and tried to pull away. It wasn't like he wanted to hurt anyone." The prosecution argued that Jason's actions went beyond fear or panic, asserting that his resistance was a deliberate act of defiance. They underscored the importance of upholding the rule of law, warning against allowing emotion to excuse behavior that threatened public order. As the evidence mounted, the courtroom felt the weight of the unfolding narrative, a story of youthful exuberance clashing with authority, of protest turning to confrontation, and of individual choices amid collective unrest. Throughout the presentation, Jason remained stoic, his expression unreadable. His repeated "whatever" echoed silently in the minds of those watching, a refrain that underscored the divide between the boy on trial and the world demanding accountability. The prosecution's case was meticulous, weaving together visual evidence and personal accounts to construct a clear timeline of events. They highlighted Jason's premeditated involvement, pointing to messages on his phone and social media posts expressing a frustration and intent. Investigators testified about discovering texts exchanged in the days leading up to the protest, including phrases like, "We have to make them listen," and "No turning back now." These messages suggested a level of planning and awareness that complicated the defense's portrayal of Jason as a reluctant participant. The prosecution contended that his choices were conscious and purposeful, aimed at maximizing the impact of the protest, even at the expense of the law. In cross-examination, the defense sought to challenge the interpretation of the evidence. They questioned the reliability of witness recollections amid the chaos and argued that the tension of the moment could explain Jason's resistance. They emphasized his youth and immaturity, suggesting he lacked the capacity to fully understand the consequences. Yet the prosecution remained resolute, reinforcing the narrative of a community disrupted and a boy who had crossed a line. They painted Jason not merely as a victim of circumstance, but as an active agent in the destruction. As the day wore on, the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations and restless shifts. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, yet the story behind it was complex, a tangled web of protest, fear, anger, and consequence. Judge Martha Ellison listened intently, her gaze occasionally flickering to Jason. Though his whatever attitude persisted, the judge seemed to search for any sign of remorse or understanding. The courtroom awaited the defense's response, knowing the trial was far from over. Outside the courthouse, reporters and community members debated the unfolding drama. Some saw Jason as a symbol of youthful rebellion, a boy pushed to extremes by systemic neglect. Others viewed him as a cautionary tale, a reminder that actions have consequences no matter the cause. For Jason Carter, the trial was a crucible, a moment where his choices, his defiance, and his silent rebellion were laid bare under the unforgiving light of justice. The prosecution's evidence had set the stage, but the story was far from complete, with the defense poised to offer its counterpoint in the days to come. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted palpably as the defense took a moment to peel back the layers behind the charges, delving into the personal and familial context that had shaped Jason Carter's recent actions. It was a chapter of the trial that revealed the boy behind the defiant whatever, exposing the struggles that simmered beneath his indifferent exterior. Jason's mother, Karen Carter, was called to the stand, her voice soft but steady as she recounted the family's hardships. A single mother balancing multiple jobs to make ends meet, Karen described a household strained by financial instability and emotional fatigue. "It's been hard," she admitted, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I work long hours cleaning offices and sometimes take on extra shifts just to pay the bills. Jason knows this. Sometimes I think he feels like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders." She spoke of the sacrifices made to keep Jason in school, the late nights helping with homework when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them both, and the quiet moments when her son withdrew into silence. "He's a good kid," she insisted. "Sometimes I think he just doesn't know how to express what he's feeling." The protest was his way of trying to be heard. Mark Carter, Jason's father, was absent from the trial, the result of a recent separation that had left Jason feeling untethered. Karen explained that the breakdown of their marriage had been a source of tension and confusion for Jason, who struggled to reconcile his parents' conflicts with his own needs. "He's lost his footing," she said quietly, "and instead of finding help, he's pushed away the people who want to support him." School counselors and teachers were next to testify, painting a portrait of a teenager grappling with emotional turmoil and academic decline. Ms. Angela Simmons, a history teacher at Lincoln High, described Jason as a student who once showed promise but had recently become withdrawn and irritable. "He stopped participating," she said. "His grades slipped, and he seemed overwhelmed, like he was carrying burdens we couldn't see." Counselor Diane Mitchell recounted sessions marked by frustration and silence, where Jason struggled to articulate his feelings. "He didn't want to talk much," she admitted, "but I could tell he was wrestling with anger and sadness. He felt isolated, misunderstood." The defense presented this narrative not to excuse Jason's actions, but to provide context, a plea for compassion amid the legal consequences. Michael Reynolds, the defense attorney, urged the court to consider the emotional landscape that had shaped Jason's behavior, emphasizing the potential for rehabilitation. Jason is a product of his environment, Reynolds argued passionately. He is not a hardened criminal, but a young boy overwhelmed by factors beyond his control, family strife, economic hardship, and the pressures of adolescence. His protest was a cry for help, a desperate attempt to assert control in a world that often feels chaotic and unforgiving. Reynolds called upon experts in adolescent psychology who testified to the impact of such stressors on youth behavior, highlighting the importance of intervention and support rather than punishment. They spoke of the dangers of labeling troubled teens as criminals, warning that harsh penalties could exacerbate emotional wounds and hinder growth. Throughout these testimonies, Jason remained largely silent, his usual defiant whatever replaced by a somber stillness. Moments caught on courtroom cameras revealed fleeting glimpses of vulnerability, a downcast gaze, a slight tremor in his hands, offering a stark contrast to the boy who had earlier met the charges with indifference. The prosecution countered by acknowledging Jason's difficult circumstances, but reaffirmed that responsibility must still be taken for his actions. Prosecutor Linda Morales emphasized that personal struggles do not grant immunity from the law. "We must hold individuals accountable," she stated firmly, "but accountability can and should be balanced with opportunities for growth and support." The courtroom was left to grapple with this complex intersection of justice and mercy, punishment and rehabilitation. Jason's story was no longer just about spray-painted walls and resistance. It had become a human narrative of hardship, resilience, and the search for understanding. Outside the courtroom, the community's reactions mirrored this complexity. Local support groups and advocacy organizations rallied around the idea of providing better resources for youth mental health and family support, citing Jason's case as emblematic of broader systemic failures. At the same time, some residents expressed frustration, worried that sympathy for the defendant might overshadow the need for consequences. In conversations held in coffee shops, social media threads, and community meetings, Jason's case sparked debates about the pressures faced by teenagers today and the best ways to address them. The trial became a focal point for discussions on how economic disparities, family dynamics, and school environments converge to shape young lives. As the defense rested its case, the courtroom prepared for the next phase of the trial. Judge Martha Ellison maintained her composed demeanor, aware of the delicate balance she would need to strike in her forthcoming ruling. For Jason Carter, the unveiling of his personal and family context offered a moment of humanity amid the legal storm, a glimpse into the struggles that had fueled his defiance, and a reminder that beneath the whatever was a boy desperately seeking connection and understanding. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity as defense attorney Michael Reynolds rose to present the core of his argument, a plea rooted in youth, frustration, and the promise of rehabilitation rather than retribution. His voice carried a calm conviction as he addressed the judge, jury, and assembled spectators, weaving a narrative that sought to reframe Jason Carter's actions within the broader tapestry of adolescent struggle and societal pressures. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Reynolds began, "Jason Carter is not a criminal mastermind nor a hardened delinquent. He is a 15-year-old boy grappling with emotions, circumstances, and decisions that many adults would find daunting. His actions during the Lincoln High protest were born from frustration, peer influence, and a desperate desire to be heard. A desire that, unfortunately, led him down a path of poor judgment. Reynolds painted a picture of a young teenager overwhelmed by the weight of family instability, a home fractured by separation and financial hardship, and the mounting pressures of an education system failing to engage him. He emphasized Jason's academic decline, his struggles with anger management, and the isolation that had enveloped him in recent months. Jason is at a critical juncture, Reynolds continued. He stands before this court not just accused of vandalism and resisting arrest, but as a youth who, with proper guidance and support, can be redirected toward a positive future. Punishment alone will not heal the wounds nor address the root causes of his behavior. The defense called upon school counselors and psychologists who testified to Jason's potential for growth if provided with counseling and mentorship. They stressed the importance of community programs focused on anger management, emotional expression, and constructive activism. Several teachers echoed these sentiments, describing Jason as a bright student whose spark had dimmed under the weight of personal and systemic challenges. Ms. Angela Simmons, who had earlier testified about his academic struggles, now spoke of his occasional moments of insight and creativity, indicative of untapped potential. Reynolds also highlighted Jason's remorse, subtle though it was. While his repeated "whatever" may seem indifferent, he argued, it masks a deep-seated fear and uncertainty. This is a boy who doesn't yet know how to navigate the consequences of his actions or express his regret in words. The defense strategy was clear: to humanize Jason, to shift the focus from punishment to possibility, and to urge the court toward a sentence that prioritized rehabilitation. Yet, as compelling as the defense's case was, the prosecution remained resolute. Prosecutor Linda Morales stood to remind the court of the seriousness of the offenses and the impact on the community. "We are not minimizing Jason's struggles," she said, "but the law exists to protect public order. Vandalism damages not only property, but the trust and safety of the community. Resistance to arrest undermines the authority necessary to maintain peace." Morales argued that while youth is a factor to consider, it must not become a shield for unlawful behavior. She called upon the jury to weigh the evidence carefully, balancing empathy with responsibility. Throughout the proceedings, the judge maintained a composed demeanor, aware of the delicate balance between justice and compassion. The courtroom atmosphere was charged yet respectful, with every word carrying weight. Jason himself remained largely silent during the defense's arguments, his usual dismissive "whatever" replaced by a quiet, almost unreadable expression. Observers noted moments when his gaze faltered, as if grappling internally with the realities unfolding around him. As the trial progressed, attention turned to the testimonies of counselors and teachers called by the defense. They described Jason's sessions marked by frustration and silence, his occasional bursts of anger, and his struggle to articulate the complex emotions fueling his behavior. Dr. Emily Harris, a child psychologist, explained the challenges faced by adolescents like Jason. At 15, the brain is still developing areas responsible for impulse control and emotional regulation. She testified, when combined with environmental stressors such as family instability and academic pressure, this can manifest as defiance and risky behavior. However, with targeted intervention, positive change is entirely possible. Other experts underscored the importance of community and school-based programs aimed at providing support, highlighting successful models that had reduced recidivism among youth offenders. The defense also introduced letters from community members and mentors who had worked with Jason, attesting to his good qualities and potential for reform. Despite these efforts, the prosecution's case emphasized that such interventions should complement, not replace, accountability. They argued that consequences serve as a necessary deterrent, reinforcing societal norms. The courtroom was left to weigh these competing perspectives between understanding and enforcement, between rehabilitation and retribution. Outside the courthouse, the community remained divided. Supporters of Jason's defense called for increased youth services and mental health resources, while others voiced concerns about the message leniency might send. In the weeks leading up to sentencing, discussions about juvenile justice reform gained momentum. Jason's case became a focal point for debates on how best to balance compassion with responsibility in the legal system. As the trial's next phase approached, all eyes remained fixed on the courtroom, awaiting the judge's decision and the path it would set for a troubled boy whose future now hung in the balance. Judge Martha Ellison sat behind the bench, her expression grave yet composed, as the courtroom fell into a heavy silence awaiting her verdict. After days of hearing testimony, reviewing evidence, and weighing the impassioned arguments from both prosecution and defense, the moment had arrived for the judge to deliver her sentencing, a decision that would reverberate through the lives of those present and the wider Dallas community. Jason Carter, Judge Ellison began, her voice steady and deliberate. This court has considered the totality of the evidence presented, the facts of your involvement in the vandalism at Lincoln High School, and your resistance to arrest, as well as the personal and familial circumstances that have influenced your behavior. She paused briefly, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the courtroom. The law requires that actions have consequences, but it also recognizes the potential for rehabilitation, especially in minors. Turning to the charges, the judge recounted the specifics, the spray-painted slogans that defaced school property, the disruption caused to the community, and the physical struggle with law enforcement officers. These offenses are serious and cannot be dismissed, she continued. However, your age, background, and the expert testimonies regarding your emotional state have been taken into account. The courtroom remained tense as Judge Ellison outlined her decision. Therefore, this court sentences you to a term of community service, mandatory probation for a period of 18 months, and enrollment in counseling programs designed to address anger management and emotional regulation. She added that Jason would be required to participate in educational workshops focused on civic responsibility and the consequences of vandalism. The judge's gaze softened slightly as she addressed Jason directly. This sentence is intended not as a punishment alone, but as an opportunity for growth and reflection. The court hopes that you will use this time to understand the impact of your actions, repair the harm caused, and work toward a positive future. Jason sat motionless, his face unreadable as the sentence was delivered. Yet when the court clerk asked if he understood the terms, he responded in his usual flat tone, "Whatever." The word echoed through the chamber, a stark contrast to the solemnity of the moment. Some in the courtroom exchanged uneasy glances, interpreting the response as indifference or defiance. Judge Ellison's eyes lingered on Jason for a moment longer before she continued. "Mr. Carter, I expect you to take these responsibilities seriously," she said firmly. "This court will be monitoring your progress closely." As the sentence was formally recorded, murmurs spread among the spectators. Some nodded in approval, believing the judge had struck a fair balance between accountability and compassion. Others whispered doubts, questioning whether the consequences were sufficient given the damage caused. Jason's mother, Karen Carter, let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Relief flickered across her face, tempered by concern for her son's future. Mark Carter, his father, remained stoic but attentive, his eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and apprehension. The prosecuting attorney, Linda Morales, maintained a composed demeanor as she acknowledged the court's decision. "We respect the court's judgment," she stated. "Our primary interest is in ensuring that justice is served and that the community's trust is upheld." Defense attorney Michael Reynolds allowed himself a faint smile, recognizing that the sentence aligned with his plea for rehabilitation over incarceration. "This outcome provides Jason with the support he needs to learn and grow," he remarked quietly. As the courtroom began to disperse, Jason remained seated for a moment, his gaze distant. The weight of the sentence seemed to settle upon him, though his outward demeanor remained guarded. His repeated "whatever" had not shifted, but those who knew him sensed an undercurrent of uncertainty beneath the surface. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered to capture the reactions of those involved. The case had drawn significant attention, sparking conversations about juvenile justice, youth, mental health, and the responsibilities of communities to support troubled adolescents. Community leaders weighed in, some praising the balanced approach, others calling for more systemic changes to prevent similar incidents. Local schools announced plans to increase resources for student counseling and conflict resolution. Meanwhile, Jason's case became a focal point in ongoing debates about how the justice system handles minors involved in criminal activity. Advocates emphasized the need for programs addressing mental health and family dynamics, while critics stressed the importance of maintaining order and respect for the law. Back in the quiet of their modest home, Karen Carter prepared for the challenges ahead. The sentence offered a chance for her son to change course, but the path would not be easy. She resolved to support him through the community service hours, counseling sessions, and probationary period, hoping that beneath his repeated whatever lay a boy ready to find his way. For Jason Carter, the judge's sentence marked a turning point, a blend of consequence and opportunity that would test his resilience and capacity for growth. The courtroom's final words were not an end, but a beginning, setting the stage for a journey fraught with challenges and the possibility of redemption. The courtroom was still thick with murmurs and shifting bodies as the judge's gavel fell, concluding the sentencing of Jason Carter. Yet, moments after the formalities ended and the spectators began to rise, a sudden, sharp sound pierced the room, a thud followed by gasps and hurried footsteps. Jason, who had sat motionless through the pronouncement of his sentence, now slumped forward, collapsing onto the cold, polished floor of the courtroom. Panic rippled through the crowd as bailiffs and court officers rushed to his side. Jason's face was pale, his breathing shallow and erratic. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and his eyes fluttered shut, struggling to focus. The judge immediately called for a recess, her voice steady but urgent, as medical personnel were summoned to attend to the teenager. Karen Carter, Jason's mother, pushed through the crowd, her face etched with alarm and disbelief. "Jason, what's wrong?" she cried, kneeling beside him as a bailiff gently held her back. Mark Carter, too, approached, his expression torn between fear and helplessness. Paramedics arrived swiftly, checking Jason's vital signs and administering oxygen. They noted his rapid heartbeat and shallow respiration, diagnosing an acute anxiety attack triggered by the overwhelming stress of the sentencing. The medical team carefully lifted him onto a stretcher, assuring the court and family that he would receive immediate care. The courtroom had transformed from a place of judgment to one of crisis in a matter of moments. Witnesses recounted the eerie stillness that fell over the room as Jason's collapse punctuated the gravity of the situation. Some whispered about the immense pressure placed on youth in the justice system, while others expressed sympathy for a boy clearly battling inner turmoil. Judge Martha Ellison, visibly shaken but composed, addressed the court. "We will recess to allow Mr. Carter to receive medical attention. This incident underscores the need for careful consideration of the emotional and psychological impacts on young defendants." Outside the courtroom, Jason was transported to a nearby hospital for evaluation. Doctors explained to his parents that the anxiety attack was a severe response to acute stress, exacerbated by underlying emotional struggles. They recommended immediate mental health support, including therapy and potentially medication to manage anxiety symptoms. Karen and Mark Carter grappled with a mixture of guilt, fear, and determination. The sentencing had been intended as a path toward rehabilitation, yet the physical manifestation of Jason's distress revealed just how fragile his state truly was. "We have to do more," Karen whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He needs help, real help, not just punishment." The incident sparked a wave of concern and conversation within the community. Mental health advocates seized upon Jason's collapse as a poignant example of the challenges faced by juveniles in the legal system. They called for increased resources, trauma-informed care, and a reevaluation of how courts and schools support at-risk youth. Local media coverage highlighted the incident extensively, framing it within broader discussions about youth mental health crises and the often overlooked emotional toll of judicial proceedings. Interviews with psychologists, educators, and legal experts emphasized the necessity of integrating mental health services into juvenile justice. Within Lincoln High School, students and staff expressed a mixture of sympathy and reflection. Counselors made themselves available for students affected by the trial and its aftermath, recognizing the ripple effects that such high-profile cases can have on a school community. For Jason, the collapse marked a critical turning point. It was a visceral reminder that beneath the layers of defiance and indifference lay a vulnerable boy overwhelmed by forces beyond his control. His repeated whatever had masked a desperate struggle with anxiety and fear. In the days following the incident, Jason began a regimen of counseling aimed at addressing his anxiety and building coping mechanisms. The court agreed to modify certain probation requirements to accommodate his treatment schedule, recognizing the importance of mental health care in his rehabilitation. Karen and Mark committed themselves to supporting Jason through this difficult period, attending family therapy sessions and advocating for his needs within the school and legal systems. Their efforts underscored the collective responsibility to nurture rather than simply punish young people facing complex challenges. As the community absorbed the implications of Jason's collapse, conversations shifted toward a more compassionate understanding of juvenile justice. The incident served as a catalyst for renewed calls to balance accountability with empathy, emphasizing prevention, intervention, and support. In the quiet moments away from the courtroom scrutiny, Jason confronted the reality of his situation, a reality that demanded more than a dismissive whatever. It was a moment fraught with fear, but also potential, a chance to confront his demons and begin the arduous journey toward healing and growth. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but Jason's collapse had irrevocably changed the narrative. No longer was he just a defendant. He was a boy in need of care, a symbol of the fragile intersection between youth, justice, and mental health. The days following Jason Carter's sudden collapse in the courtroom sparked a wave of reflection and action throughout the Dallas community. What began as a legal proceeding had transformed into a broader conversation about youth mental health, the pressures faced by teenagers entangled in the justice system, and the urgent need for improved support services within schools and courts. Local advocacy groups seized the moment to highlight gaps in mental health resources, particularly for vulnerable youth grappling with trauma, anxiety, and behavioral challenges. The Dallas Youth Outreach Coalition organized town hall meetings, drawing parents, educators, mental health professionals, and policymakers to discuss how to better address the intertwined issues of juvenile delinquency and emotional well-being. At these gatherings, testimonies poured in from families who had faced similar struggles. Children overwhelmed by academic stress, family instability, and social pressures, yet falling through the cracks of existing systems. The coalition emphasized the necessity of early intervention programs, counseling availability in schools, and training for law enforcement to recognize and respond compassionately to youth in crisis. Within Lincoln High School, counselors reported an uptick in students seeking support, spurred in part by the high-profile nature of Jason's case. Teachers and staff collaborated to create safer spaces for dialogue, encouraging students to express frustrations without fear of punitive consequences. Peer mentoring programs gained traction, aiming to foster resilience and connectedness among students. Meanwhile, the Dallas Juvenile Justice Center initiated reviews of its protocols for handling cases involving mental health concerns. Judges and attorneys participated in workshops on trauma-informed approaches, learning to balance legal accountability with recognition of psychological distress. The courts explored partnerships with community mental health agencies to offer diversion programs focused on rehabilitation rather than incarceration. The media coverage surrounding Jason's case played a pivotal role in shaping public perception. Editorials and opinion pieces debated the complexities of juvenile justice, cautioning against both harsh punishments that could derail young lives and leniency that might undermine societal norms. Experts weighed in on the challenges of navigating this delicate balance, highlighting the importance of individualized assessments and comprehensive support. Public officials responded with proposals aimed at bolstering funding for school counselors, increasing access to mental health services, and implementing restorative justice initiatives. city council meetings featured impassioned discussions about the role of education and community resources in preventing incidents like the Lincoln High protest from escalating to legal action. For Jason and his family, the surge of community attention was both overwhelming and hopeful. Karen Carter found solace in the support networks emerging, connecting with other parents navigating similar journeys. She became an advocate herself, speaking publicly about the need for compassion and resources for families facing the dual challenges of legal and mental health systems. Jason's treatment continued with a multidisciplinary team, including therapists, educators, and probation officers working collaboratively to create a supportive environment conducive to healing and growth. His probation terms were adjusted to accommodate therapy sessions, and community service was integrated with mentorship programs designed to build skills and self-esteem. The ripple effects of Jason's case extended beyond his personal circumstances, prompting schools across Dallas to reevaluate their disciplinary policies and mental health strategies. Training sessions for staff emphasized recognizing signs of distress and fostering inclusive, supportive atmospheres. Student-led initiatives advocating for mental health awareness gained momentum, further amplifying the conversation. Despite these positive developments, challenges remained. Funding constraints, stigma surrounding mental health, and systemic barriers continued to impede comprehensive solutions. Yet, the community's renewed focus on youth well-being marked a significant step toward addressing these entrenched issues. As Jason navigated the complexities of his rehabilitation, he encountered moments of resistance and progress alike. The path was rarely straightforward, fraught with setbacks and revelations, yet the support systems mobilized in the wake of his court collapse offered tools and opportunities previously out of reach. The legal proceedings that once centered solely on charges of vandalism and resisting arrest had evolved into a catalyst for broader societal reflection. Jason's case illuminated the fragile intersection of adolescence, justice, and mental health, challenging the community to rethink how it supports its youth. Through the collective efforts of families, schools, courts, and advocates, Dallas began to foster a culture more attuned to the needs of its young people, one that recognized the importance of compassion, early intervention, and the potential for transformation. In classrooms, courtrooms, and community centers alike, conversations sparked by Jason's experience continued to unfold, shaping policies and attitudes with the hope of preventing similar tragedies. The story of a 15-year-old boy's defiant whatever had become a powerful impetus for change, inspiring a commitment to better understand and support vulnerable youth before their struggles escalated into crisis. Jason Carter's case grew into more than just a legal matter. It became a catalyst for profound reflection and reform within Dallas's juvenile justice and mental health systems. The ripple effects of his trial and the events surrounding it ignited conversations far beyond the courtroom walls, emphasizing the critical importance of compassion, understanding, and proactive support for vulnerable youth. In the months and years that followed, policymakers, educators, and community leaders collaborated to implement changes inspired by the lessons learned from Jason's experience. Legislative efforts focused on expanding access to mental health resources in schools, ensuring that counselors were available to students before crises escalated to legal intervention. Funding was increased for programs offering anger management, emotional regulation, and peer support, services designed to address the root causes of behaviors like those exhibited during the Lincoln High protest. Within the juvenile justice system, training programs were overhauled to equip judges, attorneys, and law enforcement officers with the tools necessary to recognize signs of trauma and mental health struggles. The courts embraced trauma-informed approaches, emphasizing rehabilitation and individualized care plans over punitive measures alone. Diversion programs gained prominence, providing alternatives to incarceration that emphasized healing and community reintegration. Schools across Dallas adopted restorative justice practices, encouraging dialogue and accountability, rather than relying solely on suspension or expulsion. These initiatives aimed not only to reduce recidivism, but to foster empathy and resilience among students. The culture within educational institutions began to shift, promoting environments where youth could express their frustrations safely and constructively. Jason's personal journey mirrored this broader transformation. After his sentencing and subsequent treatment, he gradually engaged more deeply with counseling and community programs. The repeated "whatever" that once defined his responses softened over time, replaced by moments of reflection and tentative hope. Support from his mother, school counselors, and mentors helped him navigate the challenges of adolescence amid the consequences of his actions. Though the road was difficult, Jason's academic performance showed gradual improvement, and he began participating in peer-led initiatives aimed at preventing youth involvement in destructive behaviors. His story became a touchstone in local discussions about the importance of early intervention and the power of second chances. Community organizations leveraged the attention garnered by the case to advocate for sustained investment in youth services, emphasizing that prevention was key to avoiding the heartbreaking situations that lead to courtrooms and hospital beds. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns sought to destigmatize mental health struggles and encourage families to seek help before crises emerged. The media continued to cover developments in juvenile justice reform, highlighting success stories and ongoing challenges. Experts underscored the complexity of balancing accountability with empathy, cautioning against simplistic solutions. Yet, the collective will to improve systems for vulnerable youth remained strong. For many in Dallas, the Wilson case became a cautionary tale about the potential darkness that can infiltrate even seemingly ordinary lives. It underscored the necessity of vigilance, support, and willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics, mental health, and societal pressures. The legacy of Jason Carter's trial endured as a symbol of both the failures and possibilities inherent in addressing juvenile delinquency. It reminded the community that behind every legal case lies a human story, one deserving of dignity, understanding, and the chance for redemption. As Dallas moved forward, the lessons of Jason's experience infused policies and practices with renewed purpose. The city embraced a more holistic approach to youth justice, recognizing that early recognition of emotional distress coupled with accessible support could alter trajectories and save lives. In classrooms, courtrooms, and community centers, the echoes of Jason's defiant "whatever" transformed from a cry of indifference into a call for change, a testament to the resilience of youth and the power of a community committed to nurturing its most vulnerable members.